Hi, and welcome to the Scientist Sage Sangha. And tonight we're talking about a really interesting topic, responsibility. And when people hear the word responsibility, they kind of think that it's, the way we get to blame other people for something, or, that we want to be responsible for ourselves, which is sort of like being independent and don't need people around. And there's lots and lots of things. And I would say more of them are not good for us or not positive, maybe even. But really, it is, if you break it into those two words, and that's why I did that in the email that went out this week, it is responsibility, the ability to actually choose our own responses, our circumstances, or the condition that we are in. And we don't think about it in that way. We often think about responsibility and sort of external things to us, things like, jobs and, things I've agreed to do, or relationships, or if I'm a mom and have kids, those are my responsibilities. And literally that can really, I think that gives responsibility a bad name, because it seems like a bit of a burden, or, it might be a bit of power if I have all the responsibility, things like that. But there are lots of different ways to look at responsibility. There's that real, first level, like things that I've agreed to do. If I've agreed to take a job and do that, then I'm responsible for the work. Or if I have a child, I'm responsible to care for them. And it's really at that really clear level where it's not too, hard to figure out what's what. And but beyond that, like the higher idea about we are responsible for the choices we make and the actions we take and how we respond to things. And this is harder because we tell people all the time, well, they're being irresponsible, which would be interesting to find out. Is it the ability part or the willingness part about responsibility? Can the person see the response that would be good for them and choose that response? Are they able to? Are they willing to? Or is it not something they perceive? And maybe we have an opinion as opposed to the right idea. But and everything from when people are dating, who's going to buy dinner, or when people get married, how is the money going to be organized? If one person has responsibility for it, often that creates some imbalance and trouble further on. And so there's lots of things that it's really important to think about our responsibility in, not in that negative way that weighs us down, but what kinds of freedoms do we get with it? What kinds of interconnections do we get? Because if we can't have that flow of interconnection with people where I'm responsible one day for, going grocery shopping, and that person's responsible the other day for taking the dog out, or in business, if I'm responsible to bring forward information that might not make people happy, but it might be pertinent to the job that they've asked me to do. And so in counseling, I am responsible for making people feel bad a lot of the time. And they need to feel bad because they are bad at feeling bad. And when they get good at feeling bad, then they get better. And so my responsibility isn't to make them feel good all the time. It really isn't. And so having clear ideas about what our responsibilities are and how they mesh with other people's. Because if we get confused about that, or if people have different opinions, and certainly people from different cultures, people from different homes, people from different occupations, when they places they've had their training might be different about how responsibility is handled. And so it's important to get further along and notice that. And when we are okay being responsible for our choices and our responses, then we start to have a different interface with the world. Because in the world right now, there's so much blame and laying responsibility on other people for my feelings and my experience. And that kind of problem just gets sort of bigger and bigger, because whoever doesn't take responsibility and puts it on somebody else, then that person goes to push it to them. I'm not responsible for that, instead of meeting that place in the middle. And I'm just going to show a diagram. I'm going to share my screen here. Just a moment. Now, okay, there we got it. And this idea about a balanced, conscious idea of responsibility is just really, really important. Because if I understand that this response I have needs to be balanced and conscious, I don't keep tipping over this teeter-totter. If I'm irresponsible and either don't care, and even if I can't care, okay, so sometimes people in depression can't do the things that they're responsible for. They may not be able to take care of those children or show up for that job or even manage their own responses. Often, when people get really depressed or get really agitated with different kinds of mental health and physical health problems, then it looks like they're being irresponsible. But as people understand the idea of are they responsible, if I can notice, is this person able to respond to me in a way that will work for us? And if they can't, I can do all sorts of things about that. I used to volunteer with a person that had cerebral palsy. And one of the things she did was often her arms would go like this. And, if I wasn't responsible for paying attention and not standing too close, I would get hit. And it was not her being irresponsible. She did not have the ability to manage that body movement. I could understand it and take reasonable action to step aside a little bit and still work well with my coworker in that way. So this idea of being responsible is we have to see the whole picture, number one, or we don't make good responses. We don't understand what's going on. And if we have these judgments or we get our feelings hurt and then we don't talk to somebody about it and we're afraid of things, it really messes up our ability to be responsible because we are weighing too many things in our head. Like, well, I should say this, or this is how I felt. But if I can just talk about that with someone about, okay, we're having this problem, or I'm having this problem, what do you think about it? All sorts of things like that. And when we get that further view, so we take a higher view, and in like 12 steps, I talk about a higher power, that kind of higher view. But in organizations or even in families, we take a look from a little further away about what's going on, see the bigger picture. And often we can work through who's responsible for what and what we're willing to be responsible for. Because on the other end of irresponsible is over-responsible. And so you can see what happens when this starts to get out of balance. We go from the irresponsible side, and then often people go way over and they're being too responsible. And then they wear out and then they go back to irresponsible. So it becomes a really rough ride. And we don't want to be doing that either. We want some stability. That's why it's responsibility. And so when we're looking at that, we're looking like, how can I stay more in the middle? Stay in that place of being responsible and notice, oh, I may have taken on too much here. And that has actually caused me to be irresponsible because I couldn't get it all done, or it was late, or it wasn't done well enough. So those two ends of this teeter-totter actually interact with each other. And when we can come to the middle, and this is both for ourselves and for other people, if we can see what's going on with them in this way, we can go, oh, I see. Maybe there's a reason that they're irresponsible. Maybe, they have someone in their family they're having to take care of, so they aren't performing at work so well. Maybe they have some trauma in their background, and so they're the kind of a person that gets close and then gets scared and goes away, and then close up again, scared and goes away. And we can't make any sense of this, and we might see it as irresponsible. But if we can be curious and be really mindful of our responses to people, whether those people are being responsible or irresponsible or responsible, and just notice what's going on. And I can take it down deeper for myself and go, okay, I have this tendency to do this. So if I put myself in that situation, I got to be aware of that tendency. So this idea of being responsible for our actions and our, what we're thinking, feeling, how we act those things out when we actually are responding, because sometimes we respond out of not our brains, but out of a body response. Maybe we got frightened by something, and so we yell at somebody, and they say, what are you doing yelling at me? And we were frightened, that's why. But often we will say, you're doing that, and blame them. But if we can have this conversation about, okay, here's where I'm at, it changes a bit. So there's lots of interesting things like this, taking responsibility for, our part in things. I didn't know for a long time I had a part in things. I thought I was very much on either end of this, where I would be over responsible, and then I would see other people as irresponsible. But from my view down at the over responsible end, everybody looked irresponsible. And I would get into a place where I would take on too much, and then I would be able to do it. And then I would look irresponsible. And I would compare myself to people who had better abilities to respond than I did. They had clearer thinking, they had lots of attention to use. I don't have that. I have to work a lot of attention up to get anything done, but they were able in different ways than I was. And so I would label myself as irresponsible. And for a long time, that stopped me from getting the assistance I needed with my attention so that I could become response able. So this is not as simple as it looks. And the path through is not a straight line. It really is about finding out, where am I able to be response able? Where can I fluidly just respond? Where do I get stuck up? Where do I feel I should take on more than other people? And the last thing, and I didn't include it in this diagram because I wasn't too sure where to put it, but it just occurs to me it could go underneath the pyramid itself, is control. Because control has lots to do with responsibility. When we take on too much responsibility, often we just want to control. And often our responses that are not really useful are because we want control. So we respond with control as opposed to curiosity and cooperation and things like that. We're looking for control. And especially if we have been irresponsible and can't really understand why we are, because we want to not be irresponsible. We want to be responsible, but we keep missing the mark for some reason. If we don't take some curiosity and interest in that, then we just keep trying to work harder. This happens for addicts all the time. They'll say, I just won't do that anymore. And I'll go, okay, we can try that. Then see how that goes. And then they'll come back and it doesn't go well. And I say, okay, well, why don't we try curiosity when you feel irresponsible instead, and see what's going on there. And it's so interesting because often the irresponsibility, what it looks like anyway, unravels. And it isn't. There's lots of other things going on in the background. So irresponsible isn't just this choice we make all the time. We would like to think that, because then we can say to those irresponsible people, you should do it this way and be responsible. But of course, it's useful to say, what happened there? I thought you were going to do that. Did I have the right idea about it? And, do you need any help with it? That changes people to response able, as opposed to, just being on them all the time for not doing what we think they should be responsible for. So that's a bit of a circular talk there, but it lives into the rest of this stuff. The next thing that comes is really about who we are as a person. We're responsible for that. And yes, there's so many things, our cultures and our parents and our upbringing and our experiences that add up to it. But we keep having to come to an awareness that opens us up, and we can be a little more responsible. My favorite line for people is always, well, is there a step that you could take right now? because they may say, okay, I'm never going to get out of this debt, or I can't stop this behavior. And it's like, just let's get curious about one little step, one little thought. And that starts to loosen it up. And they can take responsibility a tiny bit at a time. And then they start to feel like they are more responsible in those tiny moments. So if I want to be, say, a loving person, I want to be doing loving things, act in that way in a consistent manner, not just to one person over there and a different way to a different person over there. But if I, as a person, want to be, well, what I want to be always is kind. And so I work really hard at that. Like, what's the kind option here? Because I am responsible for whether I am kind or not. And even if I do something that I think is kind that somebody else doesn't, it's really useful for me to listen to them and say, why didn't that? Like I was wanting to be kind, but it didn't seem like it went that way. And that curiosity is my responsibility to find out what's going on. So that idea there. And then of course, it's who we are. And then it goes out to how our lives are, what we choose in our lives, and what we change in our lives. Because if I've chosen something that isn't working for me, it's still my responsibility to change something. And we can make all sorts of changes. Sometimes people, change jobs, change relationships, change what they eat. But if we have this bigger idea about how I want to be living and who I want to be as a person, and we want to become responsible to that, responsible, and we can go, oh, wait, this is what truly matters to me. And that makes it so much easier for me to say, oh, I really want to do this. And so one of the things I want to do is to be interconnected in the world. And so I do things for people. I'll volunteer for things, those kinds of things, because that's part of what I want to do. That's the way I want to respond in the world. So the way that we find out we are responding, the way we find out we can respond, and the way we want to respond are the ways that we find out how we have a personal expression of our own lives. And if we don't look at that part of it, we can wait for a long time for something to happen that will make it the way we want it. And often it doesn't. And that's one of the most difficult things that I work with people. They haven't been as responsible as they could. And there's many times where their circle of responsibility is small. We can really only affect us and the way we're acting. And then how that impacts other people will vary. But if I know that, then I do different things. I work inside first and then outside. And this also doesn't mean that I don't talk to people if I feel they're being irresponsible, particularly in connection with me. I can have that conversation with people, but it goes over much better if it is a curious-driven conversation than a condemnation-driven conversation, because those two things are very, very different. And people feel it. People feel it. And because we have this sort of negative idea about responsibility, if we start to talk about it in that way, often people move into that idea that this is a negative thing. I should have done that thing. You're saying I didn't, I must be bad, or you're thinking I'm bad, or those kinds of things. So when we can recognize that for ourselves and notice that sort of thing, it's wonderful. And we can start to move forward and move out of self-justification. Or sometimes it's just a self-referencing circle we're in. And then I only have my small world of experience to apply to it. But if I get curious and go outside that and talk to other people and say, you handle this responsibility well, how do you do that? Or, I noticed that I have this trouble with responsibility in this area. How do you look at that? And just literally get curious about it. We can go forward, making the adjustments we want, and sort of stop complaining about the things that aren't working the way we want them to in our lives. And it's not, again, about we do address things. It isn't that we avoid things. because that becomes irresponsible, because it takes a toll on our bodies and our relationships and even all the choices we make and the people around us. And people say, well, wait a minute, am I responsible for the people around me? I'm responsible for what I put out in the world. If it goes out from me like this in a positive way, great. And if it goes out like this in a negative way, I might want to change that, because that really is my responsibility. What am I putting into the world as well? And I don't need to look at who's in control and whose fault and whose problem it is, because, and I have a knee-jerk reaction like that. And I would be like, oh, that person shouldn't have driven there. And I'm like, wait a minute, I could be in the wrong. Maybe I don't know where I'm going right now. And well, some of the time I am. So this idea that, we have to figure out who's responsible for everything isn't the point that I'm talking about today. It really is about trying to be more flexible and able to look into things, whether I think they're my fault or not, but just see what's going on in a situation and how I'm contributing to it. And it changes throughout our lives too. And this is a really important idea to tuck in here, because if we learn responsibility really young in a healthy manner, then we work in that sort of collaborative way, saying, oh, I can do that. And no, I don't think I can do that. Maybe I can't lift that thing, or I don't have a computer to do that thing that's needed done. But I can say, oh, wait, I can do this. I can go and pick that stuff up, or I could make that phone call, or I can work in a responsible way because I know what I can do and I know what I want to be doing. A lot of the time, responsibility can be undermined by choosing to be responsible for something we don't want to be responsible for, and then getting distressed that somebody else expects us to be responsible for that. And those conversations, especially in relationships, need to go on and on and on, because, like I say, over a lifetime, it changes. And so when you're young, your parents are taking care of you, and then we want our children to be independent, so we give them some room, and then we have this sort of equal kind of thing. And then as parents decline, children are taking care of them. And so it's a lovely circle if we're willing to go with it. But often we kick and scream somewhere through the cycle that we don't want to have it be like that. So really what I wanted to finish with is one other thing here. I'm just going to bring up this other part of it. Here we are. I think that's showing well now. This idea of a cycle of reactivity, because we can move into this, and we see a lot of this out there in the world right now, where there's stress, and we get into these automatic unconscious thoughts that take us into automatic unconscious negative reactions. So our responses are negative, and then that escalates. And so we get into this cycle that we can't get out of. And that's really hard on everybody. And so the idea here, the other part of the cycle, is the cycle of responsibility. So even though there's stress, whatever that is for people, there's space for conscious, reflective thoughts. And there's an idea that this is a good plan, that we will actually do this. Because if I can take that time to be conscious, I might be embarrassed if somebody calls me out for not being responsible for something. And I can just wait a minute and go, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Or actually, you know what? I never should have took that on. You're right. I can't do it. Or no, this is my understanding that I was going to do this, and this is what I've done. Or I didn't realize it needed to be done then. This is when I had planned to do it, or those kinds of things. And also take responsibility for the way that my life is turning out. So I might take this space for conscious, reflective thoughts, like in my own recovery of both trauma and addiction and depression, all sorts of things like that. I had to really create a space, and I was terribly resistant. I didn't want to be responsible for it. In our society, it's much easier to make the doctor responsible. And so they give us the pill. If they get the right pill, we won't have a problem. But it doesn't really work that way. It really, if I don't have that space for that conscious reflective thoughts, I don't even work well with a counselor or a doctor or somebody who is trying to help. I go back and forth and I'm reactive back into that other side of the negative emotion. But if I can keep persistently taking this space for conscious reflective thoughts, and whatever that way that is, people talk about journaling or in a self-help group or doing meditation. There's a million ways to do this, but it really is taking the responsibility to do that, to create that space and time to notice what's going on with us. Because then we feel more intentional and we freely choose different responses. Or we actively watch them as they happen and we can't control them. And we notice that, oh, look at that. That wasn't a very skillful response, as they say in Buddhist work. And I want to be skillful in my responses. I want to, bring down that level of stress in my life. And I want to be able to bring down the stress of people around me. The biggest compliment I get is, I want to be as calm as you. And then I laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh because many times I'm not calm. But I do work diligently at taking that space for the conscious reflective thoughts I'm experiencing. And that calms me. And I get to bring that into my life. And I get to share that with other people in my particular profession, which I love to do, and with my family and my friends. So if I am intending to be a kind person in the world, that's one of the ways that I meet my intention. So I take my responsibility in the world. It's like my assignment to be kind, and I take responsibility for that. And it has involved having to do a lot of things for me that make me more able to do that. So I hope this has been really helpful for you, and that you take some of these ideas and perhaps see the curiosity level increase for your responsibility, and see where you'd like it to shift and change, and see where you make other people responsible, whether you make yourself over responsible. See how you're doing on that teeter-totter. It's a good way to sort of measure things. If I stack up all the things I'm responsible for on one side and I tips right over, if I go to the middle and I go, okay, yeah, I'm good with choosing that. That was a great choice. I'm able to do it. It brings my life more positive energy. I can do this. And this might be grieving, or it might be celebrating, or it might be taking out the trash when it's time to take it out. And so it matters how I'm thinking about what I'm doing in terms of responsibility to me. So if I want a life that is positive, and that I have to take responsibility for the thoughts I have about the things that I do. We were talking about autonomy in our previous session, and this came up as a big thing. We feel freer to choose when we think we are choosing. When we think, yeah, I am going to choose this. Whether that means I get out of bed and go, I get to choose to shovel the snow, or, take the dog out in the freezing weather because they need to go out right now. If I think I choose that, then I have a different response. So these ideas of autonomy and responsibility go together. But this positive sense of responsibility, not the over responsibility or avoiding responsibility. So I will shut this down now. I'm not going to close today with a meditation, because this is really a sort of hands-on, wide awake thing. And as you're conscious of what's going on, you'll really start to notice where you have a wide range of ability to be responsible and where it's fettered. So I'll send you out to do that. And If you would like to be on our mailing list, you can send me an email asking to be added to the mailing list. We send out an email that has a lot of these ideas in print that you can look back at. And if you would like to suggest a topic, I would love to hear from you about that too. I'm always interested in exploring a new word. So love to hear from you. Any comments as well. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, and take good care. Sorry there, I didn't stop the share before I said goodbye. I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be. Now we'll say goodbye.